Beloved, grace and peace are yours from the one who writes our stories, Jesus the Christ. Amen. You know, one of the things that we talk about a lot here, the council talks about it, your pastors talk about it, we talk about what opportunities do we create here at Gloria Dei so that people who come here can encounter and know God. And I would suggest that what Jesus just said in today's reading is really not something we would use in a come to church campaign. He tells his followers that they will be arrested and imprisoned, that their families will betray them, their friends will betray them, and some of them will even die because of their faith. You will be hated by everyone, Jesus says, so come on, follow me. But what do we think that following Jesus as disciples is actually about? What stories do we tell ourselves and each other about why we're here, about why we follow the risen Christ? In today's reading from Luke's Gospel, Jesus is coming to the end of his public ministry and to the end of his life. He knows what is about to happen. It is serious stuff. He has made the government rulers unhappy. And the government itself is corrupt. It isn't taking care of the most vulnerable people. Only the rich are getting richer. Hate is the loudest voice in the room. And the disciples come to Jesus. And are they talking about how they can step in and help? About how they can care for the most vulnerable? Are they talking about how to feed the hungry and take care of those in need? No, they are not. They are talking about how beautiful their building is. And Jesus is having none of it. I tell you, he says, the days are coming when not one stone will be left. It will all be torn down, he says, so focus on what really matters. And then he goes on and names all of the ways this will be hard, this will be difficult, they will encounter hardship. And he says that all of this hardship will give them an opportunity to testify. Now, many of you know that I grew up in Alabama. Yes, we are having a moment of mourning. It's fine. But a fun fact about Alabama is there aren't a lot of Lutherans. There are pockets of Lutherans where Germans came and settled. So Huntsville, Coleman, and that's about it. But there are a whole lot of Southern Baptists. Almost all of my friends in the South are Southern Baptist. I've gone to church with them. They have come to church with me. We have agreed that we all have traditions that would be worth sharing. For example, my Southern Baptist friends love that we have communion every Sunday. You can't say, I love you often enough. And I particularly appreciate their practice of sharing their stories as a part of their worship. They call it giving their testimony. Or as someone in the first service said today who grew up Southern Baptist, can I get a witness? And y'all, the first service, like, they were into that. They responded, yes, amen. So in today's gospel reading, Jesus says that hardship, that wars and plagues and persecution and hatred gives us a chance to tell the story, to give a testimony. It's right there in verse 13. He says, this will give you an opportunity to testify. the hardest of seasons invites our witness. They do not require it. There is not a timetable to get out there and tell your hard stories. But the hardest of seasons really invite our witness. And here's one of the reasons this is so important. If we could only talk about God, if we can only talk about God's faithfulness in the times and seasons that are happy and shiny and good, then we are only telling half of God's story. And withholding the rest of the story, well, that does a disservice to the entire narrative. Because it is when we can speak out of the chaos and the devastation and the despair and the grief and the diagnosis and the abandonment and the disillusionment and say, even in this, God is faithful. Then the truth of that sinks in. And we live in a culture that doesn't talk about the hard things. We turn away from hard stories as quickly as we possibly can. We avert our gaze, we move on, we bootstrap our way to the next good, feel-good story. And we do this in all kinds of ways. But the stories of hardship invite us to share our witness of the faithfulness of God. Why does it matter to us if in the midst of this thing, whatever this thing is, God has not abandoned us? So one of the hymns that sort of crosses denominations, but definitely Baptist and Lutheran, I'm looking at the Methodist, I'm looking at the Presbyterian, is I love to tell the story. Yes, it's in y'all's hymnals too. Excellent. And we're going to sing it at the end of this sermon. It's our hymn of the day. But this hymn is an invitation for us to remember why we testify, why we tell the old, old story to a right now world. The first verse says, I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and his glory, of Jesus and his love. You know, there is not much in this world that is as true as the love of Jesus is for us. Jesus says today that we cannot even count on our parents and our siblings, and that might be one of the worst truths of all, but that we can count on him. And it is a love that will satisfy that longing in our hearts. It is a love that pulls us together as God's people. It is a love that we show to each other and to the world in word and in deed. This is the love that has been present in this congregation for 120 years. Jesus and his glory, Jesus and his love. And then the hymn writer goes on to say, I love to tell the story, how pleasant to repeat what seems each time I tell it more wonderfully sweet. I love to tell the story, for some have never heard the message of salvation. Now, salvation is one of the ways that Lutherans and Baptists distinguish ourselves from one another. Do you know what you have to do to earn your salvation? Anybody? I got a nothing right here, nothing. And that is right, not one single thing. Jesus has done that for us. Now, this does not mean that we don't try to live worthy lives, because we should. We should love one another, we should care for one another, we should treat everyone with dignity and respect. But if our salvation depended on us doing the right things, none of us could stand. The good news of salvation, as we understand it, is that Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again. That's grace. Christ died, rose, and comes again for all people. And that's not an easy word because, it is just counterintuitive to think I want the people who are doing horrible things to God's creation and God's people to have that same kind of love that God has for the people who do wondrous things, who show God's love in so many ways, who make soup every Wednesday night and sit out in the pouring rain so that their unhoused neighbors might have a bite to eat, who bake chocolate cakes for long and not boring council meetings, long and awesome council meetings, who care for those who are suffering or sorrowing. That is the sweet message of salvation. And then the hymn writer says, I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like the rest. At the end of the day, at the end of our lives, if I have learned anything in ministry and anything from these 6 months, it is that we will not at the end talk about our fancy cars or our big houses or our wonderful jobs or even our football teams. We will hunger and thirst to hear and know the love of God in Jesus Christ. The new song that we sing in glory is the old story of Jesus and his love. And so my hope for us today, my challenge for us today is that we make room in our daily lives to testify, to witness, to say why it matters that we walk in the world as disciples of Jesus, and then that we remind ourselves, that we say it to friends and to family and maybe even to strangers, that God's love is alive and active in the world, and that God's love is for everyone, even them, and even us. Now, I have to admit, my Baptist friends are pretty good at this testifying thing, but I will also say that my Lutheran friends and my Methodist friends and my Presbyterian friends are also good at it as well. The world is filled with too much division, too much hatred, too much judgment. We want the wicked people to be burned up like the prophet Malachi said they would be, with nothing left of them, not a root, not a branch, nothing. But because Jesus came, we are called to something else, something different. We are called to love not as some sort of abstract idea or sentimental thing on a greeting card. We are called to love as a way of life. And this kind of love is a love that we don't keep to ourselves, but a love whose story we are willing to tell with our lives, with our words, and with our songs. Thanks be to God, and let the church say, amen.